Everyone says the same thing after a breach. But we had MFA. Uber had MFA. Microsoft customers had MFA. Okta customers had MFA. And yet, attackers still got in. Not because multi-factor authentication was broken, but because it was no longer relevant by the time the real attack began. For years, MFA was sold as the final answer to identity security. Passwords were weak, phishing was everywhere, credentials leaked constantly. MFA felt like the fix, something you have, something you are, something stronger than a password. And for a while it worked. Attacks at the login prompt dropped significantly. Security dashboards turned green. Compliance boxes were checked. But attackers didn't disappear. They adapted. Multi-factor authentication answers exactly one question. Is this user allowed to sign in at this exact moment? It does not answer whether access should continue, whether the behavior after login makes sense, or whether trust should be revoked once conditions change. Authentication is a moment in time. Security is everything that happens after. Modern attacks are built around that gap. Let's start with Uber in 2022. Uber had MFA enforced. This was not a company ignoring basic security hygiene. The attacker didn't exploit a vulnerability or break cryptography. They didn't bypass MFA in any technical sense. Instead, they used a human weakness known as MFA fatigue. Using stolen credentials, the attacker repeatedly triggered push notifications, again and again. Eventually, a tired employee approved one. From Uber's identity system perspective, everything worked exactly as designed. The password was correct, MFA was approved, a session token was issued, trust was granted. And that moment matters more than most people realize. Because once that token existed, MFA was finished. It had done its job. The system now assumed continuity. It assumed that the entity using that session was still the same trusted user. No additional MFA challenges appeared. No behavioral reassessment happened. The attacker moved laterally through internal systems, accessed Slack, discovered scripts with elevated privileges, and escalated access. MFA didn't fail Uber. It succeeded. The failure was that trust lived far longer than verification. This pattern shows up even more clearly in Microsoft 365 environments, where attackers often don't need to trick a user into approving anything at all. In multiple real-world Microsoft 365 incidents, attackers used malware or advanced phishing kits to steal session tokens directly from a user's browser. The user logged in normally. They entered their password. They approved MFA. They went back to work. Nothing looked suspicious. No alerts, no warnings. Behind the scenes, the attacker copied the session token and replayed it from another system. From Microsoft Entra ID's perspective, this was not a new login. It was simply a trusted session, continuing as expected. Outlook opened. OneDrive synced. Teams conversations were accessible. No MFA prompt appeared because no authentication was happening anymore. Security teams responded the way they were trained. Password resets. MFA reinforcement. User education. None of it worked. The attacker never needed to authenticate again. As long as the token remained valid, access continued. This is why modern attackers no longer care about passwords. Tokens are the real keys. Tokens represent completed trust, and most identity systems treat them as unquestionable until they expire. The same fundamental issue appeared in Okta-related incidents, where attackers obtained valid session tokens from support systems. There were no brute force attempts, no suspicious sign-ins, and no MFA failures in the logs. The attackers didn't break in. They resumed sessions that were already trusted. From the system's point of view, nothing unusual was happening. The sessions were valid. The tokens were legitimate. From the attacker's perspective, they were effectively the user. MFA wasn't bypassed. It simply wasn't involved. At this point, the red thread should be obvious. MFA verifies identity at the door. Tokens carry trust forward for hours or days. Identity systems are extremely good at guarding entry and surprisingly weak at questioning what happens afterward. This is also why stronger MFA alone will never fix the problem. You cannot protect something that exists after authentication using authentication controls. More factors don't help once the session already exists. Better user training doesn't stop token replay, and cleaner dashboards don't change the underlying trust model. The real issue is that trust is rarely reevaluated. Sessions persist too long. Permissions accumulate. Access granted for convenience becomes permanent by default. Attackers don't rush. They blend in. They look exactly like legitimate users because, from the system's perspective, they are. This is where modern identity security has to change. The solution is not removing MFA. MFA is still necessary, but it is only the starting point. Real security requires limiting how long trust lasts and how far it can be abused. Short-lived tokens reduce the blast radius. Device-bound sessions make token theft harder. Continuous access evaluation allows risk to be reassessed mid-session. Privileges should be minimal and temporary, not broad and permanent. Security needs to assume that compromise will happen and focus on containment, not perfection. So when someone says, "We're safe, we have MFA," the correct response isn't disagreement. It's a follow-up question. What happens after MFA? How long does trust persist? How quickly can it be revoked? How far can a single session go? Because MFA didn't fail, it did exactly what it was designed to do. Our trust model is what failed.